and welcome to my iBasso amp shootout. Now, just for some clarification, iBasso has sent me the DX340, including all four of these amplifiers, the AMP15 that comes with it, of course, but the AMP14, 16, and 17 now in this shootout, so I can bring my thoughts and my ears to what I think of these different amps and how they sound differently. So let's get into the shootout here, and in this format, I'm going to tell you what song I used, and I'm going to tell you what gear I used to give you an idea. Now, everything on the DX340 for me was using harmonic filter number 5. So it was the same for every single amp. What else that I did? Amp gain was on high and DAC gain was on low. It takes me a tremendous amount of time to listen. But I had some good times, not just pleasure listening, which I did in this last long weekend, but it was really great that I had some downtime, no pressure, and I could just really wrap my head around what I was hearing and bringing them to you. Anybody doesn't think that doing this takes a tremendous amount of time, you are incorrect. So the last 2 days, I put my critical listening hat on because it's different from your just listening hat. Critical listening, you are trying to hear the differences in gear, and it isn't as easy as you think it is. And you have to kind of put aside all of your precognitive notions of what you thought you were hearing before, and really just trying to wrap your head around the differences between different amps and put aside your biases of what you like and your kind of music that you like and all that other stuff. So for me, and this is why I chose a bunch of different gear, because all of these, and I used a bunch of IEMs that do have different sound characteristics. And when I was pairing them to the song, I was trying to listen specifically for certain elements. So, like in this first track, I was listening to Poem of Chinese Drum by Hock Man Yim. Now, and I was using this off of Unique Melodies Stardust. This IM has double dynamic drivers, which has tremendous articulate bass. It goes deep, it's fast, it's punchy. And I was listening to how these 4 amps specifically, including, you might say 5 amps, and then if you throw in the 12-volt element in there to put it on 12-volt with the linear power supply, you get even more. So you can imagine how many. I think I'm down in the critically listening to probably in the last 2 days for about 12 hours in total, which is insane. It's my ears are burned out, really. Like after tonight, I don't think I want to listen to anything. Maybe after a break. I don't know. But let's go. Let's start off with, I'm going to start off with AMP15. Now, I set volume at 44, and each track was a bit different. And I was listening to either FLAC or DSF files on the 340 and some Tidal as well. So here's how I heard AMP15 on this track. And this track is, 12 minutes of drums and then banging the drumsticks together, and you're listening for the resonances of the drums and the depth of the drum and the stage and the things going on around you. So here's how I listened to this. So AMP15, this amp is an excellent pairing. I'm going to say that again in this review. with the DX340. It's a fantastic amp, and it's great that it came with it. One of the criticisms that people had with AMP15 was they said maybe the bass was a little bit light. I don't necessarily agree with that at all. And it would really depend on your rest of your gear and synergy, right? But so with the Stardust, bass sounds very tight and very good layering and depth to the notes. It sounds wonderful on these IMs. And here's where I started then using the linear power supply and the 12 volt input. Just to get a sense, and I stopped doing that after a bit. Just I wanted to again wrap my head around the differences that 12 volt with the linear power supply makes, and that'll come to play later in my conclusion, right? But the 12 volt goes deeper, has more of a decay, and sounds more layered in the harmonics. It just sounds bigger, and that's what the 12 volt did for me when I paired it with the 340. Now AMP16, same volume, solid. Now here's our two modes: solid state mode and tube mode. In solid state mode, bass has a tad more drum skin reverberations, but it sounds softer. The drum sticks, when they're tapping them together, they don't sound as sharp or as defined as AMP15. AMP15 is definitely a more resolving amp card than AMP16 in solid state mode and tube mode. 12 volt again, more filled out, even more filled out, and the notes are allowed to finish a little bit fuller. So 12 volt makes a bigger difference than you would think, and why that's such a great feature. In tube mode, bass sounds softer, especially the second harmonic. So when they hit the drum skin, and then it trails off, when you're hearing the secondary resonances of the drum skin, it just sounds softer. It's not as clean and defined. And it also has a different stage presentation with the tube mode that it does. It does sound wider. It sounds fuller on tube mode, AMP16, than solid state mode. So that's how I heard that one. Now let's get into AMP17 here. Before I jump into AMP17, I want to say something. Just because this is the latest amplifier, I'm not going to pump it up and shill it out to being the latest and greatest. That's not how I do reviews. Anybody who watched my AMP16 review when it came out, you know I was probably one of the few that didn't go, yes, buy it now. I didn't do that because it wasn't, yes, buy it now. And I'm glad I didn't and wasn't one of those people, because this shootout certainly reinforced that thought. It would be embarrassing to come back on and do another review and go, oh, it's not as good as I thought it was. Maybe you should have toned it down. Anyway, AMP17. It's excellent. It has excellent attack and decay, the most control over the notes, the most powerful presentation when it came to bass. It was authoritative, and it really, really pulled your attention, that's for sure. Bass seemed to pull lower and more sustained in the notes. Stage height was also the highest, as well as the depth. That was a big one and this was the beginning of the critical listening journey with the 17. I had just come off of doing the BGVP Solomon, and I was raving about how phenomenal that stage was. You know what I didn't do? Because not knowingly, I didn't give as much credit to the DX340 AMP17 as I should have, because I think that was playing a massive part in on how good the stage is to that IM. Anyway, last amp in this shootout is AMP14, the new tube amp 4.4 only. I used everything with 4.4, by the way, just to make everything fair. Now, I love the bass texture and the decay the same as I did with AMP16. More than AMP15, it gives you a little bit more there, a little bit more body, but especially in tube mode. So the bass was the same, about in the same as tube mode AMP15 as I found in AMP16. But the AMP14 sounds a bit more soft into the entire mid-range. Like AMP14 to me really sounds like you are live. You are seated in the venue and you are right there, immersed into it. That's how it sounds to me. Okay, in this next track, I have switched over to my Alpha Omega Omegas. And here I'm listening to Spanish Harlem by Rebecca Pigeon. Here I'm trying to listen for female vocals, its naturalness, the texture of her voice, and what you can pick up in the nuances of her voice. And there's a spot in this track at 3 minutes and 23 seconds that on certain gear comes across differently, and I'm going to go talk about that. So we're back on AMP14 again. Now, vocals are velvety smooth. There is a great amount of texture to her voice. It's a wonderful presentation. Switching up to AMP15, presentation sounds more distance wise in the stage. It sounds further from you. The guitar becomes more prominent, and Rebecca's voice sounds sweeter, and piano notes pop out a bit more. Probably because the more resolving nature of AMP15 is where you would pick up that and the nuances in her voice. It's definitely more resolving over AMP14 and less analogness. The change of vocal tonality at the end, and that's that part at 3 minutes and 23 seconds, showed signs of strain on the AMP15, unlike the more smoothed over AMP14. So that was an interesting pickup I noticed. AMP16. Solid state mode, again, not as resolving nor as defined as AMP15. So far, the least engaging playback of all of the amps. And that bit at 3 minutes and 23 seconds sounds a bit hollow and distant. In tube mode, vocals do get sweeter and more melodramatic. Definitely a better pairing with this track for vocals, right? Stage gets narrower but more focused and more natural sounding, though. That's the way it came across. For vocals and overall musicality, tube mode, the piano has more natural sound I also picked up on as well. AMP17. Best guitar, best bass texture, vocal presence is a cross between the AMP14 but giving you the resolution and exceeding AMP15 for that as well. So the deepest, the biggest stage with the more height than the other amps. So that's how it came across on that particular track. Rackham Live by Dead Can Dance. Phenomenal recording. Done correctly in the playback, it should sound huge and spacious in the recording, and you should be able to pick up layering and depth. Now here I switched over to my fabulous set of Aurelius Salehi. Very cool I am. And I'm listening for stage and bass. It does those two things exceptionally well. Keeping on AMP17. I did this, it's a weird order, but when I had the AMP17 on that last track, I kept it in there without popping in all the time, just less wear and tear, right? So AMP17, how I heard it, well, it's very well defined. Sub bass rumble, massive stage. insane depth. You completely get pulled into just being there at the concert, listening live. That's how the AMP17 came across with that IM. In AMP14, stage depth is much narrower than AMP17. Again, I do love the bass texture. It sounds more like a recording of the concert, though, rather than being there live. The AMP14 does have a way of bringing you still more into a trance-like state with this track in its velvety smoothness. So the two amps are very different in presentation wise. So AMP15, powerful output, resolving, wide stage. Bass notes are there, but softer, not as defined. Natural sounding still, and in the vocals for sure. But it doesn't have the 3D depth that the AMP17 does. I do like the playback of this track, though, over AMP14. In the way the AMP15 played it. AMP16. Well, in solid state mode, it's the least resolving to my ear. Stage is also the most compressed in depth, width, and height. In tube mode, it opens up a bit in the stage on this recording. AMP16, though, is honestly the least engaging, especially on solid state mode. Woke Up by XG. Again on the Salehi, AMP16. Bass was kind of undefined and a bit mushy over on solid state mode for sure. Softer on tube mode again. Vocals on tube mode were nice. They were smooth. They were natural. And then I switched over to AMP17 and I went, wow, what a difference over AMP16. Bass is a lot more powerful. And on that stage is a lot more resolving and detailed, more transparent and natural sounding. Bass has also a noticeable speed and control over AMP16. Vocals are also well more defined and intoxicating on AMP17. On AMP15, bass is not as prominent as AMP17, stage is narrower than 17, and has a clean naturalness to vocals that you can pick up with the details on AMP17 where you didn't kind of get that same level on AMP15. In AMP14, I really do love vocals on AMP14. This new tube is so smooth, and this amp is so linear in its analogness. It's wonderful. While the bass is deep, it loses that speed and texture and definition to AMP17's more articulate and more powerful sound. And certainly... But the AMP14 also is better in bass texture for me over AMP15 and 16. Now, keeping going here, we're switching over to Dita Audio's outstanding single dynamic driver in the Dita Audio Mecca. And I have mine modified with a tantrum filter to kind of tone down some of those upper mids. It really makes this one a very... single dynamics are great for stage. They're great for tonality, like in the naturalness, be able to pick out instruments, and it does it very well. And this is an exceptional IM. I'm listening to D by Randy Rhoads, the studio outtakes from Ozzy Osbourne. Rest in peace, brother. You were an inspiration, and I listened to you since I was a kid, and you're missed. Before I tear up here, let's go to AMP14. Amazing naturalness, very realistic and musical. Also, one of the things about AMP14 is the top end isn't softened or muted at all. It is quite resolving, and that's the way it came across with this track. You could hear the finger slides, you can hear the pulls, you can hear him breathing into the mic, you can hear him sitting down on that cushion, the cushion letting out air. you could hear all of that. So the AMP14 is still a very resolving but analog sounding amplifier. AMP15 over AMP14, the clarity and the resolution is what you would get from the trade-off from a smoother and more analog presentation of AMP14. Especially with this track, you do get just as clean and resolving playback in the top end, but the mids are is less lush. I would say, and you can hear. I think the guitar now has a more natural sounding over the overly smoothed out maybe AMP14. So if I was trying to listen to resolving power, AMP14 might not be the one to do that with. And that's why I chose this IM and this track to get a real good sense of those two. So AMP16 in solid state mode has the narrowest and most compact stage. It doesn't sound as natural as AMP15, nor can it layer or separate instruments like AMP15, and not as lush or as musical as AMP14, even on tube mode. It's better on tube mode than solid state mode. AMP17. Most powerful. And when I say that, it's not just the presentation, it's the power output too. Again, I'm keeping all of these amps at the same volume, whatever I had it on, and I just turned it off, switch card, turned it back on, way I went. Again, I hear the AMP17 with the smoothness of AMP14, but with the more resolving power of AMP15. Bigger stage yet than AMP15, like noticeable, and a really natural and organic sounding playback. So if you're kind of, as we keep going into these things, you're seeing a pattern, I did, repeating itself. And that's how you get a really good feel of these different amps. Using different gear, listening to the same track, switching amps, going back, and away you go. I switched over now to BGVP's phenomenal IM in this quad brid with bone conduction drivers, the Phantom SE, and I have Year of the Snake edition. It's a gorgeous IM. I'm listening to Flight of the Cosmic Hippo by Bella Fleck and the Fleckstones. Got AMP17 in, so how did it sound? Bass hits are punchy. They are deep. That banjo, the twang is spot on, and the hi-hats are very clean and crisp. Switching over to AMP15. Bass is not nearly as punchy and filled out as AMP17. Stage is noticeably narrower. Great clarity and resolution, but not as musical as AMP17. More clean and clinical, I would say. AMP14, just a lush, smooth, organic playback, resolving top end with a clean and clear sparkle. Bass goes deep with a really nice pairing with resolving and detail IMs and headphones. The AMP14 is a great choice for synergy-wise. AMP16. Solid state mode. Bass is the most undefined slow out of all the amps. The slowest out of all the amps. Least resolving and the most unnatural in solid state mode. Much better in tube mode, yes. It gets closer to AMP14 for a slight taste of analog, but can't really compete with AMP14 for that or its resolving power on AMP14. 15 again, more resolving, and it's not even remotely close to AMP17 when it comes to the overall stage presentation. Okay, I'm ready to bring you the results and wrap this amp shootout up. So, last place. I'm going to say why here. Otherwise, it really wouldn't be a conclusion then, would it? AMP16. On solid state mode, it is the least resolving, has the most compressed soundstage. It is by far my least favorite amplifier out of the bunch. especially on solid state mode. On tube mode, it becomes more musical. Stage does open up and becomes fuller. But there's simply not enough. There's simply not enough in its solid state mode to say you should rush out and buy this amp card because it has two modes. It has the solid state mode and the tube mode. I didn't find that, and I never found that in my review either. And this kind of shootout really solidified what I was hearing. So now this is number 3. I'm putting AMP14, and so I had to give it some real mindful thought here. Though I do love this amp dearly, this amp card. And it's the most lush and musical. It wouldn't pair with everything, as it does tend to smooth over the mid-range a little bit. And though it does leave the high end very nice, clean, and detailed, that might not be the best pairing for everything. And which was funny because not long ago I was doing the DD Hi-Fi Surface, a very analog sounding IM, and I had AMP15 in there, and then I put AMP14 in there just for shits and giggles. And I thought, what if I paired analog with analog? And I was actually surprised. I thought it'd be too much of a good thing. Turned out it wasn't. It was just reinforcing. So that's why I do love AMP14. The one thing with AMP14 though is it doesn't have that 12 volt goodness that you can put on with the linear power supply, and that really does make a difference. And why AMP14 for me is number 3. AMP15 places number 2 because it's A1, it's fantastic. And it's included with the DX340. And it really pairs well with this player and plays upon the 340's strengths, like its great stage and its clear and present dynamics. So that's why I really, really like AMP15. I think AMP15 is by far a better choice than AMP16 if you wanted to listen to resolution and clarity. And the only thing AMP16 has over 15 is kind of a little bit fuller bottom end, but it's still not as fast and clean and defined. And I take bass quality over quantity any day. And that's what AMP15 gives me over AMP16. AMP17 combines the best out of everything I love about AMP15, but builds upon the stage to get bigger and more holographic, with deeper and wider stage, with a lot more spatial clues. Stage on AMP17 for you stage hounds like me, AMP17. It would be great if it stopped there, but it didn't. The bass is punchier than AMP15 and more authoritative. The only criticism I would have had on AMP15, but again, I not really, it doesn't bother me. I mean, I would then put on a really, super bassy IM like the Salehi, and I have enough bass, so if that's what I was in the mood for, right? The AMP17 is the most musical naturally, without the added lushness of what AMP14 throws in there. But it has also the best resolving power out of all the amps. Power, authoritative power, like driving power, deep punchy bass, killer 3D stage, massive resolving prowess, and at its heart a fun and musical sonic engine that I think would pair well with almost any gear and should give you some amazing synergy with pretty much anything you decide to pair it with. Plus, the 12 volt linear power supply, or whatever you wanted to power with, you can just use the DC power supply to make it sound even better. My 2 favorite amps in this shootout would have been AMP17 and AMP14. AMP17 for just a no compromise, phenomenal, best of everything amp, and AMP14 as the ultimate analog amp. So that's how I heard these 4 amps, and I thank you for taking the time to listen and share my impressions. So greatly appreciate it. This is a Tone Deaf Monk. I'm out for now.